Bible, and we are still on the historical books, the history of the Jews. So last week we ended at 1 Samuel. Let's go to our next slide. Again, we're in the historical books. This is after the first 5 books, which is called the Law, the Torah, or the Pentateuch. Then after we get through the historical books, we probably have a few more weeks here. There's quite a few books. Then we'll go into the rest of the Old Testament, which is the poetry and wisdom, major prophets, minor prophets, and then we'll get into the New Testament after that. Okay, let's pick up at 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel covers the events for the Jews from roughly 1010 BC through 970 BC. 2 Samuel continues with the story that begins in 1 Samuel. If we recall, we discussed last week that Samuel in the Hebrew Bible was actually one book. And then when it was translated to Greek and eventually into English from the Latin Bible, both of them divided Samuel into 2 books, 1st and 2nd Samuel. In 2 Samuel, King David, which we introduced last week, is crowned king. In chapter 2, he was first crowned king over the territory of Judah. And then in chapter 5, he became king over the entire kingdom of Israel. The other events in 2 Samuel, chapter 6 to 8, the ark returns and the Davidic covenant is inaugurated. 2 Samuel 9 through 20, the succession history of King David. 2 Samuel 9, Mephibosheth is reinstated. He was the grandson of King Saul. Yes, Rosalind, you wish to interject here?
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew the ark that you were referring to is not pieces of the ark that Noah built. It is the container that the 10 Commandments were in, that the Israelites were instructed to build according to God's instructions.
Oh,
So,
thank you for that. I neglected, the ark comes up a couple times this evening, and I did neglect to define what the ark is. So thank you for that, clarification. Second Samuel chapters 10 through 12, the sin of David. Chapters 13 through 14, the downfall of David's house. 15 through 20, the civil war between father and son. And then 21 through 24, the concluding appendices. The Davidic covenant. A covenant in the Bible specifically is an agreement between God and someone else. God makes a promise to do something. Sometimes it's a one-way covenant where God makes an agreement to do something and there's no obligation on the party he's agreeing with to do anything. And sometimes it's a two-way covenant where God agrees to do something if the party he's going into agreement with fulfills their part. Rosalind.
okay, is it safe to say that these covenants are dealing with a massive amount of people or big issues or extended periods of time. They're not like a handshake agreement for water today and nothing tomorrow.
Yes, these covenants, and I think we went over the 4 or 5 major ones early on in the Bible
Mhm.
lesson of chapter 5. But yes, these are overarching, widespread
That's the
covenant
word.
that although he makes it with one person, that person is the representation of the entire body, which is inclusive of usually the body of Israel. So the Davidic covenant, which is in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 through 16, or this is the meat of it. There's more, but this is the meat. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. So it's, again, the covenant covers an entire kingdom, and the covenant will be forever after he will reside as king forever after begins to fulfill that role. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with the rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. And in this one, as you can see, there's no conditions David or his bloodline needs to meet. This is a promise made to David that from his bloodline, a king will rise who will hold his throne forevermore. So as we go to our next slide,
Is he talking about Israel or Jesus?
on our next slide here, we see King David here in the middle, and then we see King David's offspring, and it ends in Jesus Christ. So this covenant in this prophecy is in reference to Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is this king that God promised to put on the throne. He is a descendant from King David. He's from his bloodline. And when he reigns, when he comes back, he will reign over not just the body of Israel, but over every Christian in the Christian church, which is made up of all the Christians. We're not talking about a church building, but the church being everybody who has faith and believe in Jesus Christ as their Savior. He will preside as their king for eternity. Did I miss anything there, huh?
No, sir. Not all. I don't know if you want to mention Ruth.
Yeah,
You talked about her last week, right?
yes, last week we discussed the book of Ruth, and one thing I did not mention,
But if you look at the chart here, you see it.
yes, I was going to note there's 2 circles over Boaz and Ruth, and they are predecessors. They are in the bloodline that David comes from. So both of those parties are grandparents, great, 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 great grandparents of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ actually comes from that bloodline, and that was something I did not mention last week.
And the significance is that Ruth is a Gentile. And Jesus had Gentile blood just as much as he had Jewish blood.
Yes, this is true.
And so people want to argue who he came to save. He came to save us all.
Yes, he's not only the King of the Jews, although he was referred to that when he was crucified, he is king to everybody. Yeah, when we get in after 2 Samuel, we get into the book of 1 Kings. The events in this book take place roughly 970 BC through 853 BC. Like the book of Samuel, the book of Kings in the Hebrew Bible was one book. But when it was translated into Greek, they split the book into two, First Kings and then Second Kings. The Jewish tradition attributes the authorship of First Kings and Second Kings to the prophet Jeremiah, but modern scholars consider the book's author to be anonymous. Now, the source documents for the book ranged from royal and temple records and stories about the prophets. Some of these records that were used was the Annals of Solomon, the Annals of the Kings of Israel, the N shouldn't be there, and the books of the Kings of Judah. First Kings open with King David on his deathbed, and then there's an ensuing power struggle over who would be the next king of Israel. David prophets heard about this scheme that was being developed, and they put the word in David's ear that people were scheming to put somebody else on the throne after him that wasn't from his bloodline. And from there, David named his son Solomon to be the next heir to the throne. And one thing Solomon did in First Kings was he led the construction of the temple that was to house the Ark of the Covenant. David started to plan this back in 2 Samuel, but the actual construction itself wasn't fulfilled for a physical temple to house the Ark that Ross mentioned earlier that houses the Ten Commandments, the actual building of the temple, which is a big part of the Jewish history. It's building, its destruction, is rebuilding, and its final destruction becomes a major part of the Jewish history over time. And due to Solomon's wealth, Solomon was the wealthiest person on earth. He was involved in international trade, which presented a lot of foreign women to him, whom he subsequently married. These women had other gods that they worshiped, and Solomon, unfortunately, was influenced by his foreign wives. He took on idol worship, which took him away from his pledge to the one true God. And we know from the Ten Commandments back in the book of the law. God states, there should be no other God placed before me, and there should be no idols that should represent me or anything else. And Solomon fell victim to this sin. So, as God's retribution towards Solomon, Jeroboam led a revolt against him, and the kingdom was split into two under Solomon's reign. And it was split into two nations, one called Israel, which had the territories of Reuben, Simeon, Dan, Issachar, Gad, Naphtali, Zebulun, Asher, Manasseh, and Ephraim in the north, and in the south, the kingdom of Judah was the resultant remaining of the kingdom, and those were the regions of land that was given to Judah and to Benjamin. And throughout the rest of First Kings, there were various Israel kings, and there was various Judah kings, and the rest of the book of First Kings talks about the actions and mainly the downfall of the um, different kings for both Israel and Judah. Rosalind, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just wanted to call to everyone's attention that this split was major and was not in the will of God to have his kingdoms divided. The names that Rob gave you, he said, are the 12 tribes of Israel that he talked about weeks ago, and he's continuing to talk about. They are critical. As we know, Reuben of the 12 tribes is descendant of Jesus, but all of these brothers had a role in establishing the nation of, of Israel. And so they went through the judges, and then they asked for a king. Saul wasn't up to part. God went back to his promise, and he made David king. And David, son, it didn't last very long. His grandson, under his grandson, the kingdom's divided. But Solomon, as my husband said, was evil too. So now this division is not what God wanted, and it has divided the family again.
Now, Elijah is mentioned under the Israel kings. Elijah was a prophet, but not a king. But a lot of things about Elijah was mentioned towards the end of First Kings, and Elijah was a prophet that advised two or three of the kings of Israel as he tried to correct their very evil ways.
And Elijah was from the tribe, he was a Tishabite, but he's actually from the tribe of Levi, right?
Correct. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Elijah in Second Kings. Here's a great chart, which again lists all the kings. The first chart was only the kings in First Kings, but this chart lists all the kings that Israel had. And off on a side note, you see Saul, David, and Solomon were the kings prior to these kings. But again, David and Solomon were kings over the united kingdom of Israel before the split. And Saul was the first king before the 12 regions came together as one. But after the split, this is the group of kings. The one on the left were the kings of Judah. The ones on the right are the kings of Israel. Um, as you can see, all of the kings of Israel were sinful and evil and bad, as to where the kingdom of Judah did have some good kings and they had some bad kings. The kings of Judah held their titles typically for a longer period than the kings of Israel did, because the Israel kings kept facing God's retribution due to the things that they did. But there's more kings of Judah because the country stayed free for a longer period of time than the kingdom of Israel did.
And it goes back to the covenant you're referring to.
Yes,
If they all died, then the covenant would not have been fulfilled,
yes,
correct?
correct. Okay, Second Kings, and this will be the last book we talk about tonight, and we will pick up First Chronicles next week. This book covers the Jewish history from roughly 852 BC to 586 BC. It continues the story of the kings of Israel and Judah. It also covers the prophets Elijah and Elisha. Again, Elijah is introduced in First Kings, and he's in the first, I believe, 2 chapters of Second Kings. Elijah actually does not die. He does not have a physical death, but he's carried into heaven by a chariot. He's one of only, I'm going to get this wrong, I want to say 2 people who actually didn't die, or was it 3? It was 2, right?
2.
Yeah.
Enoch.
Now his son was Elisha, and Elisha received a double blessing from his father Elijah before Elijah was taken into heaven, and Elisha assumed his role as being the prophet over the northern kingdom of Israel. And the major story of Second Kings was the failure of the various kings of both Israel and Judah as well, and the retribution that God would take towards them because of how they failed. Rosalind.
It's my understanding that Elijah was Elijah's pupil and he was his spiritual son, but not his natural son.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
Now, the northern and southern kingdoms both had evil kings, but the emphasis of their evilness was a little bit different between the 2 kingdoms. Israel, who was the northern kingdom, I'm sorry, was taken into captivity because of God's retribution, because of their idol worship. Jeroboam introduced idol worship into the northern kingdom of Israel during his reign, and all of the other kings followed behind him. So the northern kingdom's biggest issue that God took with them was their idol worship. Robin.
This is not why the kingdom's divided, and I just wanted to make it clear to our new believers. That's why God allowed them to be uh, taken captive and scattered to the wind, but they divided for political and financial reasons, and a lot of it had to do with the capital, Jerusalem, being in the south, but the north had more money and they did most of the financing. And so they were disgruntled because they felt that David's his throne and kingdom was in the south, but all the power and money was in the north, and they felt slighted. And that's oversimplification of why they divided, but it was money and politics.
Correct. Thank you for adding that important point.
The idol worshiping was not the shoe that fell that caused the separation.
Correct.
It
That
was
was
money.
their downfall after the
Mhm.
the split. Now, Judah kings were just sinful and evil men, and that was their downfall.
They were?
The preponderance of them were they had good kings, but the preponderance of the kings of Judah were bad and evil. If you go back to the chart,
Yes.
we
See,
have
there's more good. Well, it is more green because they were there for longer periods, but there were some good kings. Let's see, I'd say at least 30% and over 70% of the period of their reign. Wouldn't you say?
yes, and that's why their reign was longer before they finally fell than the northern kingdom. And as we know, the northern kingdom isn't even
And
recognized
playing, yeah.
um, anymore at all. But the southern kingdom, I get these things right. The southern kingdom, after their captivity, they were actually allowed to return, which we will get into in Second Chronicles, because at the end of Second Chronicles is when King Cyrus has favor, and even at the end of Second Kings, which we'll see here, um, um, Jehoiakim, who was captured and imprisoned, was actually released and was able to sit on a quasi throne as a king, and he was paid king wages at the very end of the last chapter of Second Kings, which gave the kingdom of Judah hope that they will one day be restored, which they eventually were.
Okay, so you're talking about the Jehoiakim, the third one from the bottom, correct?
The second one from the bottom, Jehoiachin. Sorry.
Okay. It's a lot, but it's so worth it if you take the time to read and study it. So powerful.
Okay, so some of Judah's kings were sinful and evil. So all of their retribution from God came during the periods of the evil kings. So Judah went from times of rest and peace to times of revolt and turmoil, as to where the northern kingdom of Israel stayed and battled throughout the entire duration of their existence after the split. Judah enjoyed both prosperity and pain, depending on who was king at that specific time. Now, under King Hoshea, Israel rebelled against Assyria after they gave favor to them and submitted to their authority. Israel was still able to keep their kingdom, but Assyria ruled over them for a period of time. King Hoshea rebelled, and that's when they were finally taken over in 722 BC. So King Hoshea was the last king of Israel. Now, Judah endured another 150 years. They stayed as a kingdom until 586 BC. And Judah fell under Babylonian control in 605 BC, but Jehoiakim remained as king over Judah, but he had to be a vessel to Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar was really the real king, but he allowed Jehoiakim to quasi rule over his specific area.
Well, according to your chart, Jehoiakim was after Jehoiakim.
Yes.
So Jehoiakim was the first one to be the puppet king, and then
Yes.
him was after him.
Yes. Because Jehoiachin replaced Jehoiakim, and then Zedekiah, which was Jehoiakim's brother, was after Jehoiachin. But they both attempted to overthrow Babylon, and they both failed. And Zedekiah was the last one who tried it in 586 BC. And after that, the Babylonians raided Judah, took all their riches, and most of the Jews fled to Egypt as a result of the ones that were left after a lot of the Jews were held captive and taken to Babylonia. But at the end, like I mentioned, Judah was left with some hope because Jehoiachin was before Zedekiah, who was in prison after he tried to overthrow the Babylonians. They released him from jail. He was placed on house arrest, and he was given the wage of a king. So even after Second Kings, Judah, the nation of Judah, was in captivity. A lot of them was captured and moved. A lot of them fled, but they always held hope that they would be restored, which they eventually were.
And their culture and their history and their faith remained cohesive and intact.
Yes.
Because when they went to Babylon in captivity, they took all of their scrolls and all of their history and all of their beliefs with them.
Yes.
Whereas the Israelites did not do that. They were completely scattered with no identity and no cohesiveness. So they were allowed, like my husband said, with the king being given house arrest and arrest, they were allowed to all stay intact. And that, I believe and know, was the hand of God. And if you read the story of Nebuchadnezzar, if you get an opportunity, it'll be quite clear that it was God that held that nation in place and intact. And it was in part due to the obedience. Daniel and was it Isaiah? Was it I'm getting a little off the subject, so I'll turn it back over to you, hon.
No, you're doing fine. So that brings us to the end of Second Kings. But I do want to present this timeline. The book of John, because up until this point, the Bible was pretty much chronological. The book of Joshua, as we see, was first. Then the book of Judges came after the book of Joshua. Now, the book of Ruth was very short, and it covered a series of events that was during the time of the book of Judges. But then we continued in chronicle order with 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, and 2 Kings. Now, the reason I did this chart, because the next book is 1st and 2nd Chronicles, which you would think would continue the history after 2 Kings, but it doesn't. The book of 1st Chronicles covers mostly the events of things in 2 Samuel and the beginning of 1 Kings. And then book of 2 Chronicles covers 1st and 2 Kings. And we'll discuss the distinctions of these two books, although they cover some of the same information. The perspectives of the books are different, and we'll go over that next week.
And these books are after the Pentateuch, the first 5, correct?
Yes, because the first 5 are here.
There you go.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And you see these books flowed in sequence. And after Deuteronomy, we went right into the book of Joshua after that.
So those are chronological as well?
Yes.
Somewhat redundant, but okay.
Yes, they're chronological, but there's information from Numbers and Deuteronomy that's also in Leviticus, but there were different reasons of restating the same information. But the book of the prophets, which we will get into later, is all messed up as far as the timeline is concerned. Each prophet was kind of during a specific period, so their books, which aren't in chronological order as they are read in the Bible, they also overlap a lot of information that's in, starting with 1 Kings, as you can see there. Obadiah is the first one, and his timeline falls up under the end of 2 Samuel, the beginning of 1 Kings, and then they're all are scattered throughout certain time periods based on the impact that they had over the kings that they counseled. And then after the end of Kings, we will also see Daniel, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, who prophets to the body of Israel itself, but they didn't talk to the king, because there was no king. They spoke to the nation as a whole. So that
Okay, I'm gonna tell y'all something so you don't get overwhelmed and frightened. My husband is a data person, and he just gave you a whole lot of information. I am here for you. I will make sure that he puts it all in perspective and give you the logic behind it all. So don't worry if you didn't get it all today.
That's
We
correct.
work together. We are a team.
Yes, this is just for information that after the book of Second Kings, a chronological timeline is not followed after that. Not until you get to the New Testament, and then only the beginning of the New Testament follows a chronological order. And after you get after Acts, it's kind
He's
of
still
like
giving
this.
y'all data, isn't he?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and these are all things we,
Stop it, Chronicles, man.
okay, these are all things we're going to eventually get to, and we will explain it better when we get there.
So don't confuse us.
Oh, okay. So that brings us to the end of the session for this week. Again, here's our contact information. No, we truly hope something is said or taught here to spark an interest for you to open the book for yourselves, learn more. We're here to support your learning effort. If you have questions, feel free to ask them of us at any of these places, and we will put in the time to make sure you get an answer to your question. So with that, we really enjoyed tonight's class, and we hope to see you next week. And don't forget the other events throughout the week. Um, um, Prayer meeting on Wednesday, the
Sabbath
the
service on
a
Saturday,
Sabbath
Friday
service on Friday evening
at
and
6.
at 6 p.m. California time. And then our regular, more focused Bible study, if you can believe you can get more focused than this, on Sunday mornings at 9 Pacific time. And then first Sunday, which is this Sunday, Minister McQuarrie gives us a sermon and we do communion. So we love you guys. Hope you have a blessed week, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Bye. Love you.